Well, we can officially start the new year by saying it's over. And by that, I mean Stranger Things. For almost a decade, this was one of, if not the biggest TV show of all time. Everybody and their grandmother watched this show. Even if you weren't into horror, it still had something for everybody. The first season in particular is pretty much all you need to know as to how the series received its popular status in the first place. A perfectly suspenseful and even action-packed story, engaging characters that build off each other perfectly, an S-tier soundtrack, a breathtaking 80s setting that pays homage to that time period flawlessly, outstanding visual effects, and I could just go on for hours about how perfect it is, which is why I still think it is the peak of the series. That doesn't automatically stop the other seasons from being good though, as season 2 and 3 may not be on the same level of quality as their predecessor, as they did have their handful of filler, especially episode 7 of season 2, and handful of messy moments, but it was overall a worthy successor with its addition of most of its new characters and how they fleshed them out with their dynamics, and of course those sweet monster designs and action sequences. Season 4 may have been a little bit too long, but I still think it was a huge improvement over the previous 2 seasons, returning to the show's roots with a much more emotionally heavy story, better character dynamics, pacing, and extremely intense stakes that were easily some of the best in the show's history. Plus, it introduced the show's greatest villain, Vecna. Not only does Jamie Campbell Bower give the character a terrifying appearance and voice, but the overall lore of him not only being the sole cause of all the terrifying creatures like the Demogorgons and Demodogs invading Hawkins, but his overall backstory / origins as well as his connections with Eleven, all topped off with absolutely ruthless motivations of wanting to end humanity that easily make him worthy as the overarching main antagonist of the entire series. So yeah, while everything past season 1 may be flawed in its own ways, I still think the show stayed consistently good throughout its entire run. And does the final season solidify that, or ruin it? For general opinion, fans seem to be pretty mixed, with one side saying that the season was rushed and it didn't really get to wrap up all its stories properly, while other people say it was a very worthy ending to almost 10 years of what is once again one of the biggest TV shows ever made. Here's my stance on Stranger Things Season 5. It has very strong strengths and pretty jarring lows. Let's start by addressing a few strengths that every single Stranger Things season shares, and those are the visual effects on the monsters, the world of their home, the Upside Down, and just how it is shot in general. This season once again reminds us of just how much care was put into making this location unique, having the creatures that live here blend into a live-action setting so beautifully, and of course the dramatic shots during intense scenes that involve action and possession and many more. And those scenes and plenty more feel so alive thanks to the phenomenal performance from the wide variety of actors on the show, with my favorites being Millie Bobby Brown as Eleven, and of course my GOAT, Gaten Matarazzo as Dustin, who actually visited my college campus during my previous semester. So if by some miracle you are watching this, your speech was absolutely phenomenal, and I hope your legacy in this series and other projects you are involved in continue to entertain and inspire others. They finally used Mike's little sister Holly for something, and I gotta say, I really like what they did. Having her be Vecna's main victim throughout the season and luring her into this world by manipulating her in a very clever manner by pretending to be a friendly figure named Mr. Whatsit in the human world. This not only leads her into intense situations where she is being attacked by monsters and ultimately having to watch her loved ones suffer their wrath, but these instances then lead her into events where she not only forms good bonds with major characters, but she gets to have moments of amazing leadership when trying to keep the other kids that Vecna kidnapped safe. There's also this Derek kid who starts off as a little bit of a douchebag, but he quickly grows into one of the funniest things in the season, especially with his one-liners. As for recurring character relationships, I do like what they did with Nancy and Jonathan's, being how that was a consistent arc since season 1, and I can understand some people being frustrated with Dustin and Sieb's friendship conflicts due to Eddie's death last season, and I was too at first, but the way it all eventually resolves itself definitely left a good taste in my mouth by the end. However, probably the most controversial character arc in this season is Will, and this is going to lead me into talking about this season's pacing issues. Will is easily one of the characters that suffered the most in this series, from spending the first season kidnapped by a Demogorgon, to having to be the only one in the group of 4 main boys to consistently be tortured by the forces of the Upside Down afterwards, making him feel sidelined most of the time, with this season giving us complete insight on his direct connections with that world. I really love the way they handled that factor for most of the season, because in the final episode, his role in it is pretty damn underwhelming, which really disappointed me, especially with all the great scenes of him in the Upside Down earlier in the season. Maybe it's because a lot of stuff in this season does feel a little rushed, and I really felt like they could have used a lot more development to make them feel authentic. This especially applies to the final episode of the series, where so many things just happen without any real explanation or reason, and that flaw really did hit me the more I thought about it afterwards. This is where I start to get into spoiler territory, so if you haven't seen the finale yet, I'd recommend skipping to this timestamp shown here, because we are starting in 3, 2, 1, now. Let's start this section by talking about the return of a character that is rightfully looked down upon in the series, and that is Eleven's sister, Kali. This is understandable when you consider that her only appearance prior to this season is from the most hated episode of the series back in Season 2, The Lost Sister, which is a pretty good definition of filler, and didn't really add anything significant to the characters or series other than giving us a tiny drop of lore behind Eleven's past that wouldn't really be mentioned again after this episode. Kali herself didn't do the episode any justice, as her and her gang just felt like unengaging and one-note characters that go against what makes the cast of this show so likable and charming to begin with. So after never making an appearance ever again after her debut episode, she finally makes a comeback as someone who is being held in the military laboratory, but is then saved by Eleven and Hopper, and she is the character who ends up dying in the finale, and honestly, I didn't really feel much. Now, just because I hated her introduction episode didn't automatically mean that I would hate the idea of her returning with an actual purpose, but the issue is, she didn't really have much of a purpose this time either. She barely uses her powers, and it feels like she's only there to set up what ends up happening to Eleven in the finale, and honestly, of all the major character deaths in this show, her being the one to die in the finale was honestly such a weak choice, and I honestly wouldn't have really cared at all if they didn't even bring her back in the first place. I won't talk about Eleven just yet, rather I want to talk about the infamous Will coming out scene. Now, Will being gay was something that was strongly hinted at within the show since the very first episode, and I would have been completely okay with him just getting a boyfriend just to confirm that, but at the end of episode 7 in this season, they decide to dedicate an entire scene of him emotionally coming out as gay to all his friends and family, and of course a lot of people got mad and started throwing temper tantrums over this. I personally think it's fine. I, in fact, do see why it was thrown in, as the 80s was a lot more of a homophobic time period than today from what I heard, so it would totally make sense as to why Will would be nervous of his friends and family thinking less of him, but I really like the way he hugs it out with them afterwards, showing their acceptance, which I found to be cute, but then they don't really do anything much with Will's character afterwards, so I didn't really end up liking the scene as much as I wanted to. On a more positive note, I really love what they do with Max in this season. I love her team up with Holly after she gets trapped in the Upside Down, and the bond she forms with her is really compelling. On top of that, the build up to her finally waking up from the coma she fell into at the end of season 4 just felt so... And the moment where she finally does wake up from it and reunites with her friends admittedly did make me tear up just a little bit. I also really love the scene where Vecna comes to terms with who he used to be and how he was manipulated into becoming the being that he is, and when the opportunity for redemption presents itself, he chooses not to change and just continues to be the satanic monster he is, and it was honestly a really great and powerful scene with his character. Throughout the entire season, Vecna is a really great villain, as he is just so perfectly manipulative as his alter ego, Mr. Whatsit. I think the concept of him creating his own fantasy world for the children he kidnaps to their liking is so clever, in the same sense that Mabel's Prison by Bill Cipher in Gravity Falls was. Creating a world where it's everything the children love, just to make them never want to leave and separate them from their families and friends, is such a genius move, and it really makes the scenes where Holly and Max are trying to convince the children to escape the trap feel really intense. However, as for the inevitable final fight scene with the heroes versus Vecna, it was good overall, and I love the design of the Mind Flayer and the battle ending with Joyce decapitating Vecna, as the memories of all the torture he put the cast through during the series was absolute cinema, and his death really felt satisfying because of that. However, while it's still good, I feel like the overall fight scene, especially the 1v1 with Vecna and 11, was a little rushed with how quickly everything happens, especially with how fast 11 is to fatally impale Vecna. It could also be how the final fight setting is just a barren wasteland with no demogorgons, demodogs, or any of those bat creatures on their home turf. Did Vecna give them a vacation or something? Did they just quit on him and start their own lives and just make families and whatnot? It's a pretty disappointing aspect when you think about it, especially with the fact that they're fighting on their home turf. Even the aftermath has aspects that feel very confusing, as once everything feels fine and dandy for our heroes, they immediately get captured by the military, so 11 sacrifices herself in order to close connections to the Upside Down, which was a really emotional moment that admittedly got me, but then it shows that 18 months have passed and everything is completely fine and dandy with our main cast. Tons of soldiers across the course of the season lost their life trying to do their jobs because of these people's actions, and those people are constantly running away from the law with 11, who they are trying to experiment on and causing trouble for them. That person then sacrifices herself to close the Upside Down, and after so many soldiers lost their lives during that, the gang just gets off completely scot-free? How? There were a ton of crimes and felonies that they could be charged for. People who fought for the country were killed because of them, and they get no consequences whatsoever? Did Dr. K, the person behind the whole military operation, just say, okay, what we were looking for was gone, let's just pack up and leave, and let's just forget that everything happened? It doesn't break the story for me personally, even though I just rambled on about that for quite a bit. It's still a super questionable aspect that doesn't have any sort of explanation whatsoever. However, despite all those flaws, the resolution really makes up for everything, as it is an extremely wholesome send-off for every single main character that honestly made me cry. Lucas and Max finally getting together, Hopper and Joyce finally becoming an official couple, Will finally finding his place in the world, and Dustin winning valedictorian in the class, only for him to go completely off the the rails in his speech and honor Eddie in such an awesome way that was easily just one of the best moments in the entire series for me, and I am not joking. However, the moment that really got me, that really had tears flowing down my face, was the final scene where the boys and Max are all playing Dungeons and Dragons, just as how the boys were doing it at the very beginning of the series, and Mike gives a speech about how he theorizes where Eleven could possibly be, and I absolutely adore how they don't confirm Eleven's fate and leave the audience up to think of where she ended up after her sacrifice. Personally, just like how Mike theorizes it, I'd love to think that Eleven is living the life she never got to have and just living in peace, far away from any sort of danger whatsoever. And it just really, it's one of those, like, I know it's just a theory, but like, these characters are so good that it really just warms my heart to think about. It really was a great resolution to the finale, even if everything else was flawed in their own way. So to answer the question, did Stranger Things end on a good note? Yes. But it was definitely far from perfect. While I did enjoy most of the character moments, plus the action and emotional scenes really served for the most part, I can't help but feel like it was rushed in a good handful of areas, which left a lot of plot holes that make me wish there were at least 1 or 2 more episodes just to patch those up. I can completely understand someone not liking this finale and feeling underwhelmed by it, which I did to an extent, but the good stuff about it did leave me satisfied enough with what I watched overall, even if it could have been better. It is going to be weird living in a world where Stranger Things is no longer the biggest TV show that is running, so it'll be fascinating if another TV show even comes close to reaching the popularity status that this series had. 7 out of 10. Anyways, what do you think? Let me know in the comment section down below. Like and subscribe for more detailed reviews and analysis on movies, TV, and gaming. And remember to keep calm and let life carry you on.